Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Pacific Girls and COVID-19 webinar. We're thrilled to have you join us this morning. Now, before I introduce our wonderful panelists for the webinar, we'd like to kick things off with Pacific Girls' voices, because that's really who we're here to celebrate, that's who we're here to listen to, and that's who we're here to connect to and better support in our region. So we're going to start off with their voices through a video, a Pacific Girl and COVID-19 video. It runs for about 3.5 minutes, so please do listen in, and let's kick things off right with the voices of Pacific Girls.
Girls are fierce.
Girls are strong.
Girls are extraordinary.
Girls are unique. Powerful.
Confident.
Passionate and beautiful just the way they are.
We are the future of our world, and if you are discussing the future, I think our opinions are much needed.
I see girls being abused.
Corporal punishment, child molestation or child marriage, child neglect, and bullying.
Okay, some challenge saya talem ating lo time lo community or lo streets sometime one boy misave became one rubbish person no emi no cat respect lo one girl lo sometime misave mistreat them right blame lo rot too.
We were brought up by our parents with the mindset of boys going out to work and us girls staying home, taking care of siblings.
Since COVID, parents are becoming more strict. Girls are not able to go outside.
We start distancing ourselves, which is hard because we don't have time to spend together with our friends and families.
The girls I know, because of COVID, their family members lost jobs. While they're getting more times to spend with their family, they are facing financial problems at home.
Although Solomon Islands is free of COVID-19, it has affected us in many ways. Like closure of schools, I did not attend classes for 3 months, resulting in having bad grades in semester 1. Most families cannot afford decent meals. Closure of vegetables and crops markets has impacted our health. During closure of shops, I could not buy the things that girls needed, like pad.
I want my community to hear our voice, the teenagers. We have our own opinion for things that they want to change.
If they give us the opportunity and our voices to be heard, that would help us.
I would like to urge the government to organize more learning tools for our students, like radio and TV's educational programs, so that we can continue our classes online at home.
I want girls to be given freedom and feel safe wherever they go.
I want girls to speak up and share their problems.
I want girls to voice out their issues and know that they are not alone.
We would be the one working in that future. We would be the one leading that future, and I do believe that our opinions are very much needed.
Well, thank you very much to all the girls who participated in our opening video. That's drawn from the voices of girls and the perspectives they've shared with us over the last 2 years as the Pacific Girl program was developed and began implementation last year. My name is Tara Chetty. I'm a co-lead here at the Pacific Women's Support Unit, and I have the great privilege of being able to work on the Pacific Girl program along with 6 partners in 6 countries around the region, and they all contributed to the video that you just heard. So the girls have started us off right, flagging some of the critical issues that are facing girls in our region as the pandemic affects our region, even while we have low prevalence here. So I'd like to, without much further ado, introduce our wonderful panel, and I'll start here in Suva, where we are with Roselyn Sidal. She's a young feminist and gender equality activist from Fiji. She's also a first-year student at the University of the South Pacific here in Suva, who's pursuing a bachelor's degree in journalism and social work. And she believes in setting good examples to girls who are younger than herself to ensure that all girls, have the opportunity to become leaders as well. She's been involved in the Pacific Girl program as an adolescent girl leader with the Fiji Women's Rights Movement's Girls Arise program. And Roselyn has been actually with FWRM's girls programs for the last 6 years. First, of course, as a participant, but now working as an intern and advisor to the program. So welcome, Roselyn. In Canberra, we've got Julianne Guivarra, Ambassador for Gender Equality for Australia. And Julianne is Australia's first female Indigenous ambassador, currently serving as the Ambassador for Gender Equality, as she has been since March 2020. She has extensive experience with Australia's Department for Foreign Affairs and Trade, including having served as Australia's ambassador to the Kingdom of Spain, Andorra and Equatorial Guinea, the Councillor for Agriculture in the World Trade Organization, and Australia's lead services negotiator with the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, while she was Assistant Secretary of the Southeast Asia Investment and Services Branch. So welcome, Ambassador, and welcome also to the senior women diplomats who are joining you there in Canberra this morning. Switching now to Port Moresby, we've got Jacqui Joseph, the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Equal Playing Field, Papua New Guinea. Passion and high energy are Jacqui's best companions in becoming the co-founder of this highly successful local NGO in Papua New Guinea. Jacqui is both the CEO and co-founder of Equal Playing Field and has over 10 years experience working in primary prevention of gender-based violence in PNG. In 2017, her contributions were recognized as the Commonwealth Pacific Young Person of the Year after completing her Laureate Global Fellowship Program with the International Youth Foundation. So welcome to Jacqui, to the Ambassador, and to Roselyn here in Suva. We are so grateful for your time and for you joining us in the conversation. We will have other guests popping in via video at different parts of the program, as well as a few guest performances. So thank you to everyone tuning in through Zoom and also, of course, on Facebook Live. We are thrilled to have you. Now, we wanted to kick off things by getting right into it with a question for all the panelists, and we might start off in Port Moresby and come back around through Canberra to Suva. Now, what we want to start with is right at the heart of the matter. Here at the Pacific Girl Program, we've been working on a thematic brief that has been shared recently, looking at the COVID-19 impacts on adolescent girls in our region, and have identified sort of 5 key areas that are impacting girls. Of course, with each of your perspectives, whether as in diplomatic leadership, whether working directly on girls programming or leading an organization working with adolescents, you're also coming across these impacts. So Jacqui, maybe kicking off with you, what have you been learning so far about the impact of the global pandemic on adolescent girls in the Pacific? In a place like Papua New Guinea, for example, where while it is present, it is still fairly low prevalence.
Thank you, Tara. And I'll share with you all responses from the perspective of the area that we work in at the moment. But again, it could be a very different scenario when we're talking about rural PNG. So in the perspective that I'll be responding to would be just in terms of the urban settings that we work in, but also at the same time, some of the rural areas that Equal Playing Field has experience working in as well. I think first and foremost, one of the things that has come up very prominent for us as an organization is that we can never get too comfortable working with the norm. Such as, you know, there's always the way we design programs and the way we intend to deliver them. And during the pandemic situation, what we learned was that we cannot many times entirely depend on the way we normally work. And that was very clear when we came to the situation where, say, for example, schools had to be shut down for a while and kids needed to spend time at home. So for us, it really came home to what were other effective mediums that we could reach out to adolescent girls and boys that we work with. Aside from the normal way that we work, what were other effective ways that we could be able to engage our young people? Definitely throughout this time, the demand to working with adolescent girls and boys did not in any way reduce. I think it just created more demands for us to be able to bring out our messaging still, but it was looking at ways on how we could be able to bring that messaging out to our young girls and boys. Also at the same time, the period in which we had to go through also showed to us that, especially for children who are living in abusive homes or children who are going through various abuses, it came very clear that at times that they were away from school meant that they were in even more vulnerable situations. And for us as a country, that really showed as well that there's this huge demand for having the need to have children with specialized services. And that's one thing that, even though I don't have any data to share at the moment, it definitely indicates that there is huge need, especially when children are going through abuse. Throughout our schools program that we work in, we do get child disclosure cases. So that proves that there is abuse that children are going through, both boys and girls. And for these kids to be at home, that also indicates to us that there is more harm that they could be experiencing, especially when they do not have the opportunity to share or talk or disclose about the kind of abuse or harm that they are going through as kids. And so just summarizing those 3 points at the moment for us would be, the period did definitely teach us that we could never be too comfortable working with the norm, and that we continuously need to look at effective ways with engaging with our adolescent girls and boys. And also at the same time, the need to have support for children during this time is a huge need, and it's a huge gap for us.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Thanks, Jacqui. Thanks for laying out those issues and really, confirming, I guess, some of our assumptions going in, and that's what you've been hearing from the girls and boys you're working with, is that at this time where children are spending a lot more time in the home, if those homes are unsafe for them, then that really exacerbates their risk and vulnerability during this time, whether or not that's during full lockdown or whether that's due to limited or school hours or closure of schools, etc. So that's a really critical one. And the other point, of course, about how there's been a lot of assumptions about civil society groups, girls groups, women's groups not being able to work during this time, but actually it's been the opposite. Gigantic demands on everyone's time that has doubled and tripled to serve those that we need to serve. You also flagged, of course, the situation and how it differs between rural and urban areas. And that does remind us that while we're here together to celebrate International Day of the Girl and celebrate her resilience through this crisis, it also happens that our webinar falls on International Rural Women's Day, which is being celebrated this week as well. So I think we really recognize that nexus between rural women and girls and the particular situation of rural girls. So thank you for that. And now if we could cross over to you, Ambassador, in Canberra to share your perspectives, and as someone who's serving the area of gender equality for Australia, what have you been learning about the impact on girls in the region?
Thanks very much, Tara, and thank you too to Jacqui and Roselyn. Before I start, and I realise I did this before we went live, but I just wanted to give an indication to all of those people listening in from other parts and regions that I'm actually here in Canberra. And first and foremost, I'll actually acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're on here today in Canberra, which of course is the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. And I'll pay my respects to their elders past, present. And I think the key part of this today is emerging leaders as well, because of course we're here today to hear from young emerging leaders in the Pacific as well. But I'm here in Canberra with a number of women heads of mission in a large room, a large auditorium here in Canberra, who are here to listen to your stories as well. I mean, I think like myself, you know, we do realise that it's really important during a crisis like this that we take into account fully, you know, the views and perspectives of different areas and aspects of our societies, and that includes, of course, young women. I guess, you know, so I, of course, started in this role as Ambassador for Gender Equality in March this year, and almost instantly the role has been very much looking at, you know, what is happening during COVID-19. And unfortunately, I guess the one overarching theme that we have seen is that, you know, this pandemic, which has had sort of social, economic and health implications, you know, has exacerbated what we know to be existing inequalities. And in that context, you know, we're obviously seeing that it is women and girls that are disproportionately affected by the current crisis. I thought I should just start again by giving sort of some context and some figures. But I mean, obviously, Pacific Island governments were really, and communities were really quick to respond to the global pandemic. And by the 6th of April this year, about 30 countries in the Asia Pacific region had enacted either partial or full lockdowns or declared a state of emergencies to deal with the crisis, which of course, as we've even heard from Jacqui, you know, has clearly kind of disrupted everyday lives, home life and school life as well. And, you know, this is everywhere, sort of from PNG, Palau, Solomon Islands, Fiji, Tonga, Vanuatu. I've been very fortunate to be on a number of calls now. The Minister, of course, the Australian Minister for Foreign Affairs and Minister for Women, the Honourable Senator Marise Payne, has had a couple of Pacific Women Leaders meetings, one in May and one in August, where, you know, she's been trying to, you know, get perspectives and understand a little bit about what is happening in the region. I mean, the interesting phenomenon, I think Jacqui sort of touched on this point as well. I mean, the WHO statistics, the World Health Organization statistics, as of the 18th of September say in the Pacific, there's only been 37 deaths to date and around 3,000 cases. And I think, you know, as maybe it was mentioned in the video, some countries, of course, in the Pacific have not had a single case, but that does not mean that the effects of this pandemic have not been felt, you know, in communities right across the Pacific countries. Unfortunately, and I think this was mentioned again by Jacqui, and we heard it in the video, that we don't have a great deal of data on what the circumstances are of all aspects of society and how this pandemic is impacting differently on different aspects. As you mentioned, Tara, I mean, obviously the work that you are doing on the thematic brief is really a vital piece of info that is important in terms of how we, you know, respond and develop our plans more effectively. I mean, we know, at least globally, that, as I mentioned, that this pandemic's having a disproportionate impact on women and girls. 70% of our healthcare workers globally, of course, are women. We know that women and girls are bearing a disproportionate burden in terms of unpaid care work at this point in time. You know, we have seen, of course, sectors which traditionally employ women, whether that be tourism and hospitality, which is a particularly important sector, of course, in the Pacific, retail. You mentioned agriculture as well. You know, these sectors that traditionally employ women are, of course, disproportionately impacted by this crisis as well. When we turn to specifically the issues of young women, what we are seeing here in Australia in terms of the rapid assessment work that's happening right across the Asia Pacific and what's happening even more broadly globally are those issues that you've mentioned. So disruption to education. And when we look at the education aspect, it's not only that young women are affected by school closures, it's that if there is a conversion to schooling online and digital platforms, that accessibility to those platforms is not there equally for everybody. So I mean, that's another issue that I think, we really are seeing coming to the fore at this particular time. The other thing, of course, with more education and other issues of life going online is that this is causing us to be more conscious of issues around harassment and bullying and potential violence against young women and girls on online platforms as well. And I think that is an emerging issue that we really, have seen come to the fore during this particular pandemic. The other issue, I suppose, that we have heard a lot about here, sitting here in Canberra, which is not, of course, being quite the same as being able to hear it on the ground in the Pacific, is disruption to health services. So, of course, we know that as health systems are having to respond to the crisis, then, looking at some other issues around reproductive health and services are not actually being delivered as they have been. So these issues are, particularly, I suppose, affect young women and girls, and something that, we through the programs that Australia is involved in the Pacific, would like to walk forward with you all and try and help address. So I think I'll leave it there just in terms of an initial summary of the issues that we are seeing.
Thank you, Ambassador. That really was a great summary from a regional perspective, looking across at what the impacts of the pandemic look like on our region. And thank you for emphasizing that point, that despite the relatively low prevalence in our region, we're certainly bearing the brunt of the pandemic in terms of the impact on Pacific communities and on the lives of Pacific girls. So, I think the other point that I really heard coming through strongly was raising that point around online safety, that even though we're now saying, okay, great, we can connect through platforms like this, but they're not neutral spaces. Social media, online spaces are not neutral. And of course, girls are experiencing various forms of violence in those spaces also. So that brings us back to us here in Suva. And Roselyn, from your perspective, of course, seeing these issues as they're manifesting here in Fiji, amongst your peers, and of course amongst the younger girls that you've been mentoring and working with as well, what have you been learning so far around the impacts of the pandemic on the lives of girls in Fiji?
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. First and foremost, I would like to highlight how the education of us young girls has been affected. For younger girls and also for tertiary girls that are in tertiary, what happened for us in tertiary school was that most of our classes were based online. So this was a difficulty for us because most of us were not having equal access to internet and also to the gadgets. And this affected our grades for sure. It also affected how we worked out our daily routines. Also, given the fact that we had a little more to carry on our shoulder, whereby when they were our younger siblings not being able to go to school, they were at home with us. So we were also given the role to take care of them. And also at the same time, given the fact that there'll be more house chores to do since there is more activities happening around the house and all. Also, the lack of proper sanitary, because there was more focus on food supply and housing supply, making sure that everyone's okay, having the masks and all those necessities at that time. Also, the girls for me and the ones that are my age, and also for the girls that are younger than me, it felt that we were the gender and also the age group that were more vulnerable to violence. This was because since there was so much of stress going around, there was this sort of frustration that must have come about in the elders, which may have caused some sort of violence to these girls. And also, so there has been focus on the economic drawbacks and also the development drawbacks that has happened. But I feel that there is not much focus on the drawback in terms of the development as girls in the way moving forward.
Yeah.
So since all of this has happened, what happens now is that some of these girls may be suppressed by their parents and their caretakers, where they will not really be given the space to go out and mingle more and have their voices heard on such issues that were being raised and were on the platform of being raised. So what happens is now we have shifted a few steps back. That is how I feel. So in order to move forward, we will have to touch back on the confidence. Because, so school closing down, I also see it as girls not being able to come out to their peers. So this has brought about to some sort of loneliness and depression in them. And at home, they may not have the proper channel to voice it out, so they cannot really have that communication with their age group so that they could actually come out from their shell. So I feel that now we may have to work more on girls and do more in order to move forward, because we have certainly fallen back from where we were before.
Yeah. Thanks, Roselyn. Thanks for really giving us that reality check of what the picture looks like from a girl's perspective, well, from a young woman's perspective and from the girls that you work with, really hitting some of those key things that we were also coming across in our research for the thematic brief, like around the care burden and adolescent girls really carrying a lot of that care burden together with their mums and aunts in the home. That lack of access now to the basic menstrual hygiene needs, and that vulnerability to violence. But I think your final point, it really gives us a lot to think about from a Pacific Girl program perspective, in terms of our program is set up to support girls to realize their full potential. And what I'm really hearing from you is that COVID-19 has set back girls on the journey to realizing their full potential, kind of as a wide cohort. And that's really both troubling and I think a call to action for us. So thanks very much for those insights, Roselyn. We're now going to have an opportunity, I guess, to reflect on what Jacqui and the ambassador and Roselyn have said with a quick fire poll. So it's going to pop up on your screens in just a moment for participants who are logged in through Zoom. We've heard about some of the impacts. Some of them are documented as well in our thematic brief. But what we really would like your guidance on for those listening in through Zoom is, what is perhaps for you the most critical of those issues that requires our immediate attention? So please do vote on that, and we will share the results of that poll in just a couple of minutes. But as you vote, I'd like to come to a quick fire question round where the panelists get to ask each other. I don't hold all the Oprah power here, but we're going to ask Roselyn, I believe you've got a question for Jacqui in Port Moresby that you might like to share.
Hey, Jacqui, just a quick question. Was just a bit interested in what made you an equal playing field choose to work with both the boys and girls, and how effective is this initiative of yours, or rather, how has it helped bring about the awareness on girls' empowerment? Thank you.
Thank you, Roselyn. Try my best to answer your question. First, I think there are a lot of reasons why we chose to work with both boys and girls. Amongst all those reasons, one huge one would be the fact that, we all come from communities. And when you look at communities, they're all made up of men, women, boys and girls, that all make up a society. And so if we have to work together, that means that if there are programs, if there are things that we're doing, it needs to be inclusive of both boys and girls, men and women. We've also looked at the fact that working with children is something very critical for the future of our countries or even our region as well. And so whatever affects one person also affects others as well. So whatever issues men and boys face also affects women and girls as well. And so in taking into consideration the fact that we all live in a society, we all come from a community, we all come from a family, we've got our moms and our dads, our brothers and our sisters, and that underlines why we as an organization want to work with both boys and girls. In terms of effectiveness of the program, we started delivering just over about 6 years ago, would have been when our first pilot would have come. And it was not long that we started experiencing really good positive results. And this is way when we started our pilot back in 2013, 2014. And that was in terms of realizing that through our program, our young people were realizing how the way they react, especially I had a girl come up to me and she told me, "Oh, after going to the program, I realized that describing was not a good thing." I had a boy who come up to me and told me, "Look, I used to get bullied a lot, but after going to this program, the boys don't bully me anymore." And so when boys and girls go through this 8-week program, they learn about how to have empathy. The words and the actions that you say or you do has an impact on how others feel. Young people learn about setting boundaries in relationships as well, because they through the program, they realize that boundaries are not clear and there are ways to communicate them. Young people also learn how to effectively communicate as well. And so they understand that when they are able to talk in a way that others understand them, or they talk in a way that others can be able to be on the same page as them, that allows them to be able to understand each other a whole lot better. Also, another important thing we also teach as well is for young people to understand the different violence and abuses that you can go through, and the different signs that you can tell or you can see to know that this is such and such kind of abuse. And so looking at a lot of this messaging that has gone or been taught to young people does in so many ways indicates to us that the program or the model we have is working for a lot of our young people. And just about 2 days ago, we got a message from a parent telling us just how happy she was in her daughter taking part in our school action groups, and she was noticing some changes at home in her behavior. And that to us, again, indicates to us how effective the model is, and how when young girls and boys are able to work together, some of this messaging does not just transform them as well, but it also has an impact in the way their role at home is also seen as well. Thank you, Roselyn.
Thanks for that great question, Roselyn, and for your response, Jacqui. I noted that you didn't just talk about the importance of working with both boys and girls, but you also flagged how the role of working with parents and carers and guardians as well, which I know a lot of our partners are doing. So that's wonderful. Well, we've got a bit of a treat for everyone now. As you finish up your votes on the poll, we have got a poetry performance coming up for you. So this performance was recorded just a little while ago from Anna Jane Vea. She's a young woman poet from Tonga who we were able to nab because she's studying here in Suva at the University of the South Pacific, and she's recently been published by the Pacific Community. SPC RRT has released a poetry anthology called Rising Tide, and you'll see one of her poems in there. But today's poem is titled What I See, Hear and Understand, which shares the very powerful perspective of an adolescent girl growing up in the Pacific.
What I see, what I hear, and what I understand. They said I do not listen, in one ear and out the other, that I disregard advice and disrespect their culture, simply because I refuse to stretch my soul into a canvas they can paint on their instructions and deliver to the masses. They said I do not see or understand the bigger picture, but all I see is inhibition of what could be a better future. I also want to bear our flag and parade it in the light. But we need to invest in what will also glow at night. We need to see that a child is a gift and not an item that we decorate our shelves with, but needing heart and soul investment. We need to help our brothers buckling underneath the pressure of a role they were assigned but never properly prepared for. We need to help our sisters selling skin for recognition that carries only until sunrise, breaking dreams into pieces. We need to see that disability need not a segregated community, but rather seeing a new window in understanding our humanity. They said I do not listen, so listen I shall not, to the judge who fights for no one unless it regards his lot. They said I do not see, and therefore I shall not even try to understand their apology for getting caught. I will only ever listen to the child crying out, desperate for sweet freedom from the chains of a mind cult. I will only ever see doors that can be opened for my brother to walk through and claim the treasures laid up for him. I will only ever understand the purpose of my fight for my sister who is priceless and worth her throne in the sunlight. I see freedom and ability. I hear yes and amen. My seeds of hope will produce a harvest. This I believe. This I understand.
Wow. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Anna for her powerful poem. I actually only saw it for the first time this morning and was deeply moved, as I'm sure many of you who are seeing it for the first time are. I think Anna's kind of quiet voice just reminds me that you don't have to be decibel loud to be making a very loudly heard impact. Thank you, Anna. We're going to now go from Anna's voice to your voice, and if our team is able to help us, we would like to see the results of the poll. So let's share those results. And you have voted that the disrupted education that Roselyn and others were referring to is the most urgent and most critical issue to be dealt with in the immediate term, and the issue of safety. So the issue of feeling safe both at home and online, the two top critical issues that require our immediate intervention. So thanks very much for your guidance to everyone who's listening in. We're certainly taking all of this on board and sharing it more broadly with our Pacific Girl and other development partners. Thank you so much. So that brings us, I think, to the next segment of questions. And the next big kind of area that we wanted to dive in on is, having heard now from Anna, from yourself, Roselyn, and from others who inform our program, we know that girls, yes, are experiencing negative impacts, but are also very much part of our response, part of our recovery, and their agency, supporting their agency in this crisis is critical. Not just viewing them as vulnerable or victims in this crisis, but really what leadership are they going to be able to show and exercise in this situation. So maybe if we could start with you, Roselyn, thinking about how are we ensuring that girls' voices are heard in our response to the pandemic? What are some of those measures?
Thank you. Well, working as an intern for FWRM, I was given the opportunity to link with some of the younger girls. And so when we did this, what we did first was we had a check-in with these girls, since it was after a very long time that we actually got to connect with them and for them to connect with each other again. So when we did the check-in, what we actually wanted to see was how they were feeling and if there was any serious problems that they were having that they wanted us to hear and voice out more. And so for me personally, what I feel is that these girls, what they actually need to be given is the opportunity to boost their confidence. Because I feel that what this pandemic has done is that it's just held back us as girls from realizing our full potential and letting us work to our confidence and bringing out that, okay, I will speak up spirit that we should be having by now as girl advocates and girl rights advocates and activists. And also, there are activities that we did with some of these girls to make them feel more confident, make them feel more vocal. And yes, I feel that as girls, all we need to do is stick by each other. And it's not just up to movements to actually bring out the girls and help them showcase their potential, but it's also us as individuals just helping the other and lending an ear so they can tell us what their problems are, and just having that connection to have the space built where we can actually share what we feel and not just keeping it within us and something that just drowns us in. It's just a way to let out all the pain that we have and what all the pandemic has caused for us, which we may not be able to handle on ourselves. We may need someone to be there too. So yeah.
Thanks for that, Roselyn. Some of what you've talked about has also been captured really well in that recently released animated video that you and the team at Fiji Women's Rights Movement have put up, which, brilliant video, just talking about some of the impacts. But I think more importantly, in speaking to girls, it talks about where they can seek help and how. And I think in terms of those of us who seek to support girls, what I'm hearing from you is that first step of actually, hey, here's a bright idea. Let's ask them, how are you doing? How are you feeling? What do you think? And I think that's kind of what I'm hearing critically, creating those safe spaces for that conversation. So thanks very much for that, Roselyn. What about yourself, Ambassador, in Canberra, of course, working from a very different perspective? What do you think are some of the ways that we can really amplify girls' voices and ensure that they're heard in our response efforts?
Yeah, thanks, Tara and Roselyn. Yeah, I think obviously forums like this, but I know there are many other organisations who are trying to interact with key stakeholders this week, particularly as it is, commemorating the International Day of the Girl Child, actually taking time to hear the perspectives of young women and girls is vitally important. As sort of came through even on the poll, some of the issues that we're confronting, during the course of this challenge, really are almost intergenerational. It requires a different sort of perspective. For me, I have a 14-year-old daughter, and her online world is a different thing to what I can appreciate, and helping her kind of navigate safely through that is something that I'm not 100% well equipped to do, but it is a challenge for our young women that I think we need to try and understand better and hear their voices about what they are experiencing, because this is not something that my generation necessarily had to confront when we were growing up. So that's just one little example, I suppose, of those types of issues where it's vitally important that we are in listening mode, and so that's absolutely what I want to be here for today, is in listening mode. And the polling is a wonderful addition to this particular event, and also that research, so the evidence base, so making sure that we give women, as you say, the opportunity to put forward the evidence, and obviously the Australian government supports that through programs like Pacific Girl. We do through UN Women in the Women Counts program, trying to make sure that we are collecting data, which also reflects the different disaggregations of society that we have, is vitally important as we assess what we need to do in terms of the response. As you know, Tara, because you've been involved in them, obviously the Minister being involved in the Pacific Women Leaders meetings is trying to, find avenues to hear the voices of women, including young women, in terms of looking at how governments officially should respond to the crisis. I mean, the Australian government support for programs like this for Pacific Girl. We also have the YWCA RISE program, which really, are two sort of key programs for us, deliberately targeting, young women and in leadership, because this is the thing, giving young women the confidence to be future leaders in their communities is really very, very important. And when I think about my own upbringing in a very remote part of Australia, I didn't necessarily have those sorts of role models. There were no one in my family had been to university. I couldn't have imagined when I was a 10-year-old, becoming a future ambassador for Australia. It's really important, though, to have, the opportunity to believe and the confidence to believe that you can do that. So I hope through some of these programs that we do, that we can help deliver on that. I mean, obviously, the Australian government officially responded to COVID-19 through Partnerships for Recovery. We have identified, women and girls as a particularly important part of our Partnerships for Recovery efforts. So, in terms of how we continue to hear from young women, I think we certainly from the Australian government side will be looking for multiple opportunities to do that. And I think today is a really great starting point for it.
Thanks. Thanks. We'll come back to the room in just a moment, if that's okay. I might just give Jacqui the opportunity to go, because I feel like the ambassador has really raised some important issues for us there. Thinking about particularly the possibility of online spaces as the current cohort of adolescent girls, those who are connected in, so savvy at using those spaces to amplify their voices. Yet at the same time, earlier this week, from other Pacific Girl partners in the Solomons, like YWCA, and in Federated States of Micronesia, the Chuk Women's Council, we heard that many, particularly rural girls, do not have that access and are not having that opportunity, and are so particularly isolated and cut off. And we really don't get to hear those voices in particular. Jacqui, maybe moving to you now in Port Moresby, to hear from you, from your perspective, how are we doing this? How are we ensuring girls' voices are heard in our responses?
I think this is the first time that the world has had to go through a situation like this, where something that affects not just one country or not just one family, but it's affected everybody worldwide. And so just coming home to us here in PNG and just reflecting on our boys and girls that we work with, one of those ways that we realized that we needed to be able to ensure that their voices were being heard was firstly understanding that there's a lot that was happening, and that there needed to be some high level of guidance needed for our young people. And that was in terms of firstly helping these young people understanding what was happening around them, and then at the same time helping them to understand that because of what is happening, there are all kinds of changes that are going to take place. And just like how Ambassador has mentioned, some of these changes have now come in the form of our young people having high exposure online, and that could be good and also bad in some ways as well. Exposure towards the pandemic as well was very high. That level of exposure that previously would not have been the case has now happened. And so helping these young people to understand what these changes are and how these changes are going to affect them. And I think through that way, that then helps us to be able to understand, helps the young people understand what they're going through, how these changes have affected them as well. And these are very important things for us to then respond to, without having to help these young people firstly understand the situation, and also understand that as a result of this situation, we have all these changes that have taken place. And so throughout the period as well, as an organization, we're very conscious about how our young people were receiving COVID-19 messages as well. Obviously, we had our government take a really proactive role in addressing the situation, but also at the same time, that's a really broad level. We're also trying to ensure that at the level where our young people can understand the messaging, what were they understanding about it, and were they also understanding the changes that were also taking place as well. And I think having that process take place then helps us to help these young people unpack how they've been affected. And this is when their voices become very powerful, because they are able to firstly understand what's happening around them, that they then understand also the changes. And so that issue of online presence also was very high as well, because during this period, a lot of young people have been online, either it's for educational purposes, or either it's a way for them to interact with the outside world or the community around them if they cannot be outside as well. And that created a need for how those voices online could be able to, again, help inform us better in the way we're designing or creating programs to help address young people's issues. I think another consideration that we were able to look into in terms of amplifying the voice of boys and girls during this period was just in terms of if young people were experiencing problems or experiencing issues in their home, what could be ways that they could be able to communicate, or they could be able to disclose what they were going through as well. That was another one that we felt would also show that voices were being heard as well. And without having that medium, or without having a way that these young people can be able to speak about what they're going through, I think that is also a barrier for us during this period. And that is also indicates that we're not able to effectively hear the voices of young people throughout the situation that we're going through. I think another thing that I picked up on as well is just the ability to effectively communicate as well. And that was from the top, how the messaging from the government or from stakeholders who were responsible in managing the situation, to the way it was able to trickle down to the people at home, and how the people at home will be communicating to children as well, would have been also very helpful to help make the voices of our adults and girls and boys be more effective. And again, we cannot remedy a situation well unless we really understand what is happening.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Jacqui. I think you've really also flagged another critical aspect of helping to connect with girls, and that is really, and boys, having that girl-friendly, that adolescent-friendly information. The way that messaging and information is targeted, so much of it is targeted at a general kind of adult level, and it's not really appropriate or accessible for adolescents, both boys and girls. And with that information, then, girls being empowered with the knowledge and the strategies, what do I do in this situation? And it brings me back to the animated video your team produced, where it's like, you can dial 1325 in Fiji, for example, to access some safe, confidential messaging if you feel unsafe at home, but done in a way that girls really are able to connect with and absorb that information and use it and feel some level of control back over what is, at times with this COVID context, a chaotic situation for us and our young people. So I think I should stop, because I know it's time to hear another quickfire panelist question. And I believe this time, Jacqui has got a question for the ambassador. So over to you from POM to Canberra.
Thank you. And firstly, it's a huge privilege to be able to ask you this question, Ambassador. Really admire your work as well, and I'm really keen on getting some advice from you. So my question reads as, in your experience as an ambassador for gender equality, what is your advice to young people like us who are very active in this space, in terms of vision or key principles that we should, in a way, hold, or a vision that we should hold, especially when addressing issues that are a barrier for young people, could be children, could be young men and young women, in having to ensure that they are able to reach their fullest potential when they are contributing to society.
Thanks so much, Jacqui. And can I say, I'm just full of pride being on this panel with such wonderful young women like yourself and Roselyn. In fact, I feel, as I said, I only started in this role in March this year, but already I feel every panel that I'm on with young women, I just learn so much. And as I said, I think this is where that intergenerational conversation is just so vitally important. I mean, you know, if there's a piece of advice, you are already agents for change. I mean, you know, trying to tackle those longer term social norms are not something you can do, you know, at adulthood, because people's behaviours are already pretty set, you know, at those ages. It's really vitally important that we start tackling, you know, social and cultural norms at a really young age. And so the work that you, you know, as young women and young men in communities can do to address things around, you know, making sure that we have good and respectful relationships amongst each other are so important. So never doubt, my first bit of advice, never doubt the contribution that you can make at a young age to, you know, changing your communities and your societies, because you can absolutely do that. You know, so my background professionally, of course, is in the Foreign Service. And if you look at the history of, you know, women in influential roles in foreign policy, it's not a long history to share. You know, it was only in the 90s that, for example, in the US, they had their first Secretary of State, which was Madeleine Albright. And, you know, if you ever hear Madeleine Albright speak, I love, you know, get online, you know, Google YouTube some of her videos of her speaking about her experiences when she first became Secretary of State. And you hear, you know, her walking into a room, you know, on important security issues, surrounded by a table of men. And, you know, and just the importance of, you know, trying to encourage more women and in this place it applies to young women into that space, encouraging them to come, and when they do, supporting them. You know, you are a network to each other, and you can provide support to each other, you know, in helping to have that voice amplified that Tara mentioned as well. Don't be afraid to kind of, and I think this is the point that Madeleine Albright makes as well, don't be afraid to interrupt. You know, obviously that, you know, you will hear in a room full of men, they like to hear their own voices. Sometimes you just have to, and this is where Madeleine Albright's point is, sometimes you just have to interrupt. So I would always encourage you to think about that as well. You, as I said, if you've done the research, as I know your organisations do, you've done the research, you have the evidence, you have a valid point to make, so you should make it. Another point I guess I wanted to make under this, you know, was sometimes being a leader at a young age also can be a very intimidating thing. And so drawing on your own kind of personal courage and conviction is really important. Finding that reserve of confidence is really important. And I have a quote here, of course, from a very famous Nobel Prize winning young woman, of course, Malala. She, and I wanted to read this today because I think it is important to kind of, you know, mark this week. So she says, when my world suddenly changed, my priorities changed too. I had two options. One was to remain in silence and wait to be killed. And the second was to speak up and then to be killed. But I chose the second one. I decided to speak up. It takes, I mean, I read that book. I read that book with my daughter, who's 14. You know, it takes huge reserves of courage sometimes to do these types of things. And I know already just hearing from you today that you have that. And I just encourage you to take that with you through your journey in life, because I think, you know, that really is quite important. So I think they're my three little bits of advice, if I have any to give. But as I said, I think you're already doing outstanding work as young leaders. So I feel, ill-equipped to give you too much more than that.
Thank you, Julian.
That was wonderful. Thank you both, Jacqui and Ambassador, for that discussion. That was, really, really powerful. And we can see on the chat that everyone listening in really loved that. From Andy, she was saying, don't be afraid to interrupt. That should be the new Pacific Girl slogan. And I totally agree. And I think that's the message we were getting from Anna in her poem. It's don't be afraid to interrupt, because you know what? It's not very often that anyone's going to give us the space to speak, especially if we're a girl. Okay, sorry, I was really moved by that. I really enjoyed that discussion. We're going to move now to a couple of other messages that are for girls. These ones are directed at girls, and we will be sharing them further on from a couple of amazing women leaders, really speaking for International Day of the Girl and to that idea of my voice, our equal future. So firstly, we will first hear from Natasha Stott-Despoja. She's Australia's candidate to the CEDAW Committee, the Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. She is currently the chair of Our Watch, an Australian initiative on the prevention of violence against women and their children. And she is, of course, the former ambassador for women and girls, which is a role that preceded the ambassador for gender equality. After we hear from Natasha, we will then hear from the co-chair of the Pacific Women Advisory Board, a Pacific feminist, Virisila Buadromo, who is also the co-lead of the Urgent Action Fund for Asia and the Pacific, and is our fellow countrywoman from Fiji. So we'll hear from Natasha first.
When I was a girl, I was taught to speak up, literally, for the things that I believe in. That was by my feisty journalist, single-parent mother, Shirley, who also has a disability. She's deaf. So she wanted me to speak up, to stand up for the issues that I was passionate about. That's why I'm proud to have been the youngest woman to enter the Australian Federal Parliament. But I was also imbued with the notion of sisterhood. You know, it's not enough for one woman to make it or get power or success. It's all about what we do to enable the next generation of women and girls to succeed, making it better, easier, more possible for their voices and their difference and diversity to be reflected and represented in all-powerful institutions. I'm still passionate about that. I know that girls' voices are critical to this recovery, partly because you have been affected by it disproportionately. We know that women and girls are always more affected by crises, and especially in this case. I know we need a gender lens, but I would argue we need a specific girls' focus too. I know the resilience of the Pacific, and this has been a challenging time, but if we're going to build back better, we need everyone at the table. Girls are not just the leaders of the future. You're the here and now, and we need to hear from you. Happy International Day of the Girl Child. I'm sending you my solidarity, support, and sisterhood. All power to you, girls.
When I was a girl, I was introduced to books by my father. It was the first time I was introduced to a whole new world. I got to read about different experiences of different people, girls my age living in all parts of the world, and in some instances, girls living on different planets and in different times. It really deepened my curiosity. It improved my language skills. It also improved my spelling, and just got me really interested in how people told their stories in their own words. I think it's important as girls that we are confident to tell our stories in the way that we experience it. So on International Girls' Day, I strongly recommend that you pick up a book and enjoy that whole new world that opens up for you.
Thank you very much for those powerful messages. I really enjoy hearing powerful women leaders from our region reflecting on their time as girls, and we have had no idea of the positions of leadership they would end up in. And I know that we've got Natasha in the room there with you, Ambassador. It's wonderful. Thank you so much for that message. We're going to share it far and wide with our girls in the Pacific Girls Program. Thank you also to Viri, who is hopefully listening in. I think we are very much ready to hearing now. I will be quiet again and give the Ambassador the opportunity to directly ask Roselyn. I believe you had a question for her, Ambassador.
I do. Thanks very much, Tara, and thank you, Roselyn. It kind of builds actually a little bit on some of the comments Jacqui made earlier, but obviously young Pacific men have the potential to be gender equality advocates as well. Now, do you think this is currently a reality in the Pacific? And how can we better work together with men and boys to demonstrate that gender equality really does help support, those core things of having prosperity and security, and peace in our region?
Thank you. Thank you so much for the question. For the statement, I would say yes, a big yes to that. It surely will be effective. And seeing that in the Pacific, I would say that is not really that visible, as I am not very known to much advocates who are male and advocating on gender equality. But I believe that having the male gender to help out in advocating for equality would be a very good step forward. This is because, so it's like looking at it as a race. In moving forward, it's always that if we have just the women and the girls always advocating and saying that we deserve equal rights, we need equality and all, then the males will lag behind. And then to some point it happens that the male goes forward and then the females lag behind. But then somehow if we put them in a situation where we all move forward together in the fight for getting equality, what happens is that we all move forward and we are in line with what is happening. Both the genders get to agree to what should happen and what equality actually means for both the gender types. So what actually, for me, I see is that we as women and girls, what we believe is that equality is us striving forward to be equal to men. But sometimes it can also be, from a male's perspective, what they can feel is them coming to our level also, them being equal to us. So in that way, there's development and our equality is also gained. Also, I believe that from males, what we also have to do is also focus on them, have them as advocates, but also advocate for them, whereby we tell the males and the boys and the men that being soft, feeling the way they feel is okay. So like if they want to come out as how they are feeling, even in terms of this pandemic, if they have to say that they are struggling with keeping the family together, providing for the family, it is okay to share that feeling. It is okay to share that feeling. It does not make them any less superior, nor does it bring them down to a point, but it is okay to feel that way. So gender equality is not only we as women moving forward, but also the males understanding that it is okay for them to feel the way that they feel. If they have to express their feelings, it is okay for them to express those feelings.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. That's a really, powerful observation. I was writing notes as you were saying it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. That discussion is one that's always close to my heart as the mother of a little 5-year-old son, kind of figuring out this part of the equation. And of course, we do have some wonderful examples of, I think, feminist men who contribute to our advocacy for gender equality. I was just thinking of our friend Chris Prasad, who's on his way to do a gender studies master's, but is a very prominent advocate for gender equality. So we've actually got another video message that's going out to girls from Yoshiko Capelle, who is on our Pacific Women Advisory Board, but more importantly, I think, is been working for many years on advocating for young women's leadership through the Pacific Young Women's Leadership Alliance, but also through various other organizations, including in her home of Majuro in the Republic of the Marshall Islands. Welcome, Yoshiko.
Hi, everyone. When I was a girl, I found that there was way more expectations required of me, and that there were already boxes and labels in society and the status quo that I needed to fit into, and I couldn't find any one specific one that I fell under.
But you still don't fit any boxes or labels.
Well, boxes and labels are overrated. And girls' voices are important to the COVID-19 pandemic response, because it is every government's responsibility to ensure that each and every one of their citizens' needs are met during these unprecedented times.
Including mine.
Thank you so much to Yoshiko, and of course to her brilliant co-stars there, Jason and Mika, reminding us just whose voices we need to listen to in this time of crisis. All right, so we've been hearing my questions, we've been hearing your questions to each other. I think it's just about time that we open up and listen to some questions that those who are listening in have asked. So we've had a bunch of questions that have been coming in through the Q&A function now on Zoom, but we've also had people who registered earlier and had some questions that came through. So we might start there, if that's okay. Now I might jump to Jacqui in this instance and just ask Jacqui, one of the questions was around pre-existing issues. But let's put that one aside, because we'll come to that in a moment. I wanted to ask you, Jacqui, because of the work of Equal Playing Field, I believe you use sports as one of the avenues for entry, working with adolescents. The question that came through was, can sport play a role in responding to the concerns of girls in relation to the impacts of COVID-19? So what role can sports play in this?
I think I'll answer just in terms of how we as an organization use sports, and then how we feel, or I could maybe suggest some ways from my experience how sports can be an effective tool. Firstly, as an organization, we see a lot of power of how sporting concepts can help young people understand what respectful relationships should look like. And so using a lot of those concepts that children are already familiar with and helping them to understand what respect can look like. And so sport, again, is something not new to anyone. It's used all over the world. When we look at sports, we look at the fact that it has the ability to bring people together. And so it cuts across a lot of the barriers, so it eases up barriers that people sometimes feel. And so if we are looking at trying to address issues, I think sports can become a tool in firstly getting rid of barriers. I think another way that why sport is very effective as well is simply the fact that we're looking at the healthy aspects of people's lives as well. And sport can be able to promote that for everyone, and especially during a time where the pandemic has been a huge concern. And staying healthy is also a message that should be very loudly spoken as well. Sports does bring that element into it as well. I think thirdly that I would mention as well why sport has been an effective tool for us to use as well is the fact that it has been able to bring not just people together, but it also has become an avenue where key messages can be brought through. And be it whatever sport that could be used, there are effective messages that could be used through sports to bring to people. And sometimes People listen to messages, and some of these messages can feel a bit like they've listened to it too much, or it's become overly said. But I think when sports become the avenue through which it's delivered, people become a lot more receptive or responsive to it as well. Also, let's not forget the fact that sports does have a big influence on our young generation as well. Sports, having sporting heroes as well, that's a big influence. And so having positive forms of those role models through sports as well can be able to bring in the kind of messaging that we want our young people to be able to hear as well. Oftentimes, we do get a lot of role models as well, but I think for the young people that we work with, we're really concerned about the positive messages and the positive role models that our young people today should be exposed to, and the ones that they should be looking up to. Thanks, Tara.
Thanks for that, Jacqui. I really appreciate that. You know, sport is critical in the Pacific. We are sporting nations, all of us in different ways, whether that's outrigger canoeing or rugby. And I think, you know, it's something we actually do share with you in Australia, Ambassador, is this kind of real passion for sport, which makes it, I think, an important site of intervention for gender equality and for girls. You know, lots of organizations in the Pacific Girl Program have been working on, you know, giving girls the opportunity to play important sports to us as Pacific Islanders, like rugby, getting into rugby for girls, and other initiatives like that, which carry sort of other important social norms change messages, as you said, Jacqui. So Ambassador, I wondered if you wanted to reflect from Australia's perspective on this question as well, the potential of sport.
Yeah, thanks, Tara. And anyone in Australia was probably sitting at the edge of their seats on the weekend watching the Australian Wallabies versus All Blacks game, hoping we would have our first win in New Zealand for 19 years, but unfortunately we didn't. We tied. But yes, we're all very passionate about our sports here in Australia. But I think the points Jacqui made about, you know, the additional added impact of sport, whether that be health or, you know, social cohesion, or, you know, the power of influences from that to encourage and promote other social norms. I mean, those are really, you know, quite positive sort of spin-offs, if you like, of the actual sports themselves. I mean, we do, as you have mentioned, Tara, I mean, we do have a couple of programs that we run specifically in the Pacific on sports. So Pacific on Sports, and a recent one, I think it's called Australia's Sports Partnerships Program, and really it is to highlight those things, is the, you know, the health benefits that you can have from participation, the leadership qualities that you learn, you know, as part of a sporting team. You know, those things can transfer into sort of other aspects of society. So yeah, I think, you know, from our perspective, we really do see it as a really important, you know, potential vehicle for delivery of a lot of other sort of, you know, community goods, if you like. So, but Jacqui really did cover it really quite eloquently in her response.
That, yeah, in fact, the whole Pacific was watching that rugby game with you, and I think a draw with the All Blacks is considered a win in most books, so congratulations. Now, Roselyn, at the time that you first joined the girls program at FWRM, they were using sports as the entry point. So I wondered if you had any thoughts on, well, the situation now in the COVID context and whether that sort of sports approach has potential.
Yes, thank you. So back in 2014, when the girls program under FWRM actually started, what had happened was that we were brought in from different schools. And what happened in our schools was pretty much where girls only play netball and volleyball or basketball, and the boys were tagged as the soccer players and the rugby players. But then on our first day when we came in as the girls, what we were told to do was bring in your canvases and your change, and what we're going to do is play soccer. So just about playing soccer, just on our first, second, third, by our third meet, what had happened was that our confidence level as girls had reached from here right here. So what had happened was that we felt more confident being a girl and playing that sort of sport. We got the idea that, okay, there's no such thing as male sport and female sport. If you know the techniques, if you know that there's an opportunity given, you can play the sport. And in terms of this pandemic, what I feel is that having to play sports, gathering up to play sports, can be one way of moving out of isolation for the girls. Not only having your background as, okay, being in the house and doing the house chores, but moving out and playing some kind of sports will actually help you and, you know, change your mood. It'll help you change your mood. And it also just give you some fun time to just not think about whatever the pandemic is doing to you, but think on the bright side and yay, okay, I'm playing something. So yeah.
Thanks, Roselyn. I think what you were saying, it reminded me of some learning that I had from one of our colleagues, Victoria Carla, and she was telling me about, you know, why these kinds of spaces like sports or, you know, or a Girl Guides type of gathering is particularly important when you're an adolescent. Your brain is changing and is wired in particular ways where that peer-to-peer support and that opportunity for the kind of physical movement that comes with sport is actually critical in a way that, while it's great and fun for me in my post-40s era, it's not playing quite the same kind of role in terms of the needs of my brain and body. So yeah, absolutely critical. So thanks for that. I might just move to another round of questions that had come through. And remember, there's the Q&A function there in your chat if you're on Zoom, if you have any other questions for us. Now, one of the interesting questions that came from Jay Shri at the Pacific Community was thinking about what we've learnt from the past. And you've sort of done that a little bit for us here, thinking about what interventions for adolescent girls have worked in the past, and that can inform the strategies that we use to support adolescent girls in COVID-19 response and recovery. And I might come to you in Canberra first, if that's okay, Ambassador, to think about this maybe from some of the work you've encountered now in your role for gender equality, thinking about things that have worked pre-COVID that we can draw on now. So sports is one of them. What are some of the others that you've come across?
Yes, thanks, Tara, and thanks for the question. I guess as soon as the pandemic struck, we started looking for examples of instances or things that might have happened in the past that could give us some learnings that we could draw in terms of how we responded to COVID. And, lots of people started looking, of course, at, the Ebola and Zika crises and, what did we learn from those? And I guess similar to some of the things that that we're seeing now around sort of disruption in education, those types of issues arose then, they're arising now. The critical factor is how quickly can we return people to, education? How can we ensure that when people are returning to education, it's everybody? I think, one of the things that we've seen in earlier crises is that when it was okay to return to school, because of some of the issues that were mentioned here today around those carer responsibilities, girls sometimes didn't actually do the return to school. So I think we know that those things have happened in the past. We have to make sure during this crisis that they don't repeat themselves. So I think trying to draw off previous crises is really important. Those issues around disruption of health services as well. Again, this is not something new. We have seen it in previous pandemics. We really need to ensure that essential services continue to be provided throughout the crisis. And certainly, from our perspective here in Canberra, some of the support we've been giving through UN Women to their, excuse me, I lose my voice, Trust on EVA was to ensure that we continue to provide essential services, during this period. So making sure that we haven't lost track of, learnings from other crises and are trying to apply them now is something that we really have front of mind here in Canberra.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Ambassador. And you're right, we have learnt so much. We're hearing from girls now, we've heard from them before, we've learnt from similar types of crises, though on different scale before, and we need to therefore make sure we're putting those learnings into practice as we go forward. There really isn't any excuse for us in failing to serve girls when we know so much from what has happened before. So perhaps on that note, we've got time now just for a last 30 seconds or 1 minute reflection from each of you before we wrap up. I know there have been other questions coming in, but I'm afraid we are out of time. So I might just come to you first, Jacqui, then we'll go to Canberra and back to Suva. That's all right. Over to you, Jacqui, just for a final reflection.
Thank you, Tara. And just wanted to, express more that this period has also brought about the need for us to look at some of the original structures that have been there for humanity. And by that, I'm meaning the family circle. We're realizing how there's a huge need for that family circle to work. So when a situation like we have the COVID-19 coming up, the role of parents in the home becomes very effective, or if we do not have parents in the home, then we know what can happen, what are alternatives, especially in the way children, boys and girls, are guided in a home society. Again, I'm also very conscious about the fact that in traditional societies like ours, we also don't just have our families, but we have the extended community that can come in the form of church as well. People who take responsibility of individuals in the community as well. So that also is, I think, a good learning for us, where if there's been a breakdown of some of these structures that we have, there's huge need for us to restore or heal the structures so that the gap in learning for our young people can continue and can progress through. And again, we don't live in a perfect world as well. And so understanding what some of those challenges are can also help us to create a community or society that our young people can have the best support in what they're given to be able to reach their fullest potential. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jacqui, to you and the team at Equal Playing Fields. We'll cross now to Canberra for any final reflections you might like to share, Ambassador.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Roselyn, and thank you, Jacqui, for today. I mean, yes, we hear lots, during this crisis about, the need to kind of build back better, but it is quite evident we will only do that if we do listen to the voices of our young women leaders. And I think, today it has been a real privilege for me to hear from both of you and to hear those videos and to hear that poem. It really does bring home to me, the issues. And I, in my role as an advocate on gender equality, it is so important that I have those stories, that I carry them with me, that I use those in the way that I advocate on gender equality, out there in the international community. So I really do want to express my, sincere thanks for the learning that I have had today from both of you and from everyone. So I think I'll leave it there, but thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. It has really been wonderful having you part of our panel. And we'd like to thank you. We'd like to thank Natasha Stott-Despoja, who's there with you, for her message as well. We'd like to thank the Dean of the Diplomatic Corps, the Romanian Ambassador Barbulescu, and other members, senior women members of the Diplomatic Corps who are there with you today for joining in the discussions that preceded our panel as well. And now we'll come to, if we can, Roselyn, to have the last word.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tara. From my end, all I have to say is that the global pandemic, COVID-19, has already caused so much stress and so many problems. So the last thing that we need now is us pinpointing at each other. So what we can maybe do is not look towards suffocating the more vulnerable, but having everyone move forward, regain their conscience from whatever has happened, repack their bags, and just move forward together. Everyone in it together so that the future is more better and we can actually cope from what has happened in the past.
Thank you, Roselyn. Thank you for your words of wisdom and for sharing those experiences from Fiji and from the perspective of adolescent girls and young women leaders. And now it's time for us to go, but before we do, we are very excited to welcome our final performance, which will be happening live here in Suva, in the support unit office in Flagstaff. We welcome Mia Kami, and just bear with us as the camera moves around a little bit. Mia is a young Tongan woman. She's studying law and politics at the University of the South Pacific in Suva. She's passionate about gender equality, Indigenous sovereignty, and decolonization, all of which she channels into her music and songwriting. Mia will be performing her own composition, a song that was composed in honor of her older sister, Tai, who passed on at the age of 15 after undergoing multiple surgeries on her face to remove a tumor. And Mia and her family have built a fantastic Walk On, Walk Strong movement in honor of her sister, which has helped so many other young women. But this song, Dear Society, is Mia's song for her sister, reflecting on the damaging expectations that society has of women and of girls, and why it's important for us to support each other. So we end with Mia. Warm welcome.
Dear society, would you care to tell me what it is I'm doing wrong? Dear society, your expectations of me, it all just feels so wrong. 'Cause nothing ever seems right. When we mess up, we're in the spotlight, where beauty is a pretty face and it's what's on the outside that counts. 'Cause nobody's perfect, but that's what we have to be. A smile's an only option, don't you dare look unhappy. Yeah, nobody's perfect, but that's what we expect. All your down days, it's all in your head. Sincerely, society. Ego, selfishness, and pride, it's a social competition, the irrelevant amplified. We're copy and pasting what we see trending, left shallow and empty. 'Cause nothing ever seems right. When we mess up, we're in the spotlight, where beauty is a pretty face and it's what's on the outside that counts. 'Cause nobody's perfect, but that's all we have to be. A smile's an only option, don't you dare look unhappy. Yeah, nobody's perfect, but that's what we expect. All your down days, it's all in your head. Sincerely, society. No one can be who they are without feeling insecure. No one can do what they love without feeling unsure. All the hungry people, they feed off all the lies, and all the attention comes after one dies. So dear society, I can't sit here silently while you wait and realize too late that nobody's perfect. Don't ever think that you need to be. Your struggles and your battles, it's a human thing to see. Yeah, nobody's perfect, and that's perfectly fine. On your down days, you'll get by. I will stand by your side. Don't you let the world define who you should be. Sincerely,